On a broadcast tonight, North Korea fires 2 mid-range missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads shortly after the leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan agreed to pressure Pyongyang to give up its nuclear ambition. President Park holds talks with the Japanese leader for the first time in 22 months, but tensions over Japan's nationalist agenda are expected to bar full reconciliation of the two for months, if not years, to come. Plus, Korea's main opposition Democratic Party and supporters of maverick lawmaker An Chol-soo have joined forces to form a new party ahead of local election in June. With these stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening to our viewers in Korea and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Wednesday, March 26th here in Seoul. I am Ji-hae. We begin this evening in Berlin, where President Park Geun-hye is on her state visit. During her 4-day stay, she is expected to lay out her reunification policies with the North with hopes of learning from the German unification experience. For the latest on the President Park's trip, we connect live to our correspondent Choi You-sun, who has been traveling with the president. Now, You-sun, what can you tell us?
Hi, Ji-hae. President Park is currently meeting with German President Joachim Gauck. About an hour ago, she received a warm welcome in an official ceremony at the presidential palace. Later in the day, President Park will visit the Brandenburg Gate, a landmark in Berlin, symbolic of German unification, and meet with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The two leaders will focus their talks on boosting economic ties, and the Korean president will seek German cooperation on her reunification policies. And if you look at President Park's itinerary here in Germany, you can see that reunification is the main theme of this visit. On Thursday here, she will meet with former German officials who played leading roles in German unification and ask for their advice. The following day, the president is scheduled to speak at a university in Dresden, where she is widely expected to lay out details of her reunification policy. Ji-hae?
Right, You-sun, and we also hear that she is expected to, she actually talked to German broadcaster about her North Korea policies and her vision of a unified Korea. Tell us more.
Right. Earlier on Wednesday, German broadcaster ARD aired its recent interview with President Park, saying that she's open for constructive talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. President Park said when she does meet Kim, she plans to tell him that economic and nuclear development cannot coexist, and that Seoul is ready to help the North Korean people. When asked about her recently pledged reunification preparatory committee, President Park said there should be more exchanges between the South and the North to narrow social and cultural differences, and public consensus formed in the South on preparing for reunification.
You-sun, before we let you go, tell us a bit about President Park's meeting with her U.S. and Japanese counterparts in The Hague before her arrival in Germany.
Calling the North Korean nuclear issue a major security threat in the region, President Park said the three countries, along with the international community, should fashion a united response, reaffirming that they will not engage in talks with the North unless it shows the sincerity about giving up nuclear arms. The three leaders agreed that their chief envoys to the Six-Nation talks aimed at denuclearizing the North will meet in the near future. And as expected, the most contentious issues between Korea and Japan, such as Japan's denials of its colonial-era atrocities and its claims to Korea control the Dokdo Island, were not brought up on Tuesday's meeting. Ji-hae?
All right, You-sun, thank you very much for that report. That was our presidential office correspondent Choi You-sun on President Park's overseas trip. And more on that rare trilateral summit during which the leaders of South Korea and Japan had their first face-to-face. Our Hwang Sung-hee looks into whether the latest engagement would help lay the groundwork for bettering their frosty relations.
Will Korea-Japan relations take a turn for the better following Tuesday's meeting between President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe? Their trilateral summit with U.S. President Barack Obama on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague was the first official meeting between the two leaders. President Park had refused to meet with Abe until he pledged to uphold Japan's 1993 apology issued to the victims of its wartime sexual enslavement. But most experts say the trilateral meeting will do little to mend strained Korea-Japan relations. This as many believe that Tokyo's recent change in attitude lacks sincerity and has more to do with pressure out of Washington to improve its bilateral ties with Seoul.
Japan tends to behave depending on the circumstances and reveal its real stance again when the situation improves. It's a vicious cycle for Korea-Japan relations that rotates from a temporary mending of relations to a worsening of ties.
Japan's sincerity was put into question following a comment made by one of Abe's close aides last weekend. Just days after the Japanese leader promised to honor the 1993 apology, his special advisor, Koichi Hagiuda, raised the possibility of issuing a new statement over the so-called comfort women issue. He said Tokyo should consider issuing a new political statement if fresh findings emerge while the government verifies how the apology was prepared. Experts say such contradictory actions will only push the two neighbors further apart.
Just as the Japanese government is investigating its 1993 apology despite its pledge to uphold it ahead of the Trilateral meeting, a Korea-Japan summit is not a likely possibility anytime soon unless there is a fundamental change in Tokyo's stance.
Besides, there are more occasions lined up in April that could stir up the current diplomatic feud, including an annual Spring Festival during which Abe may visit the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine again, just as he did in December. 황상희, ARIRANG News.
And shortly after the trilateral meeting between leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, North Korea fired 2 more missiles into the EC. These 2 had a much longer range than any of the other Pyongyang has fired over the past few weeks. South Korea's defense ministry says the launch is in clear violation of UN resolutions. Ji-hae has the details.
2 mid-range ballistic rockets flew 650 kilometers from an area north of Pyongyang towards Japan before splashing into the EC early Wednesday morning. North Korea has been firing missiles into its eastern waters with regularity over the past 2 months, but this one was identified by South Korea's defense ministry as a Nodong missile, which represents a change. They have a maximum range of 1,300 kilometers, which means they can reach not just South Korea, but Japan as well. Given the more dangerous nature of the missiles, the Defense Ministry held an unusually early press briefing Wednesday morning to strongly condemn the move.
North Korea's ballistic missile launch is an outright violation of UN resolutions, and it's an act of provocation against South Korea and the international community.
The launch of the Nodong missiles is the first in nearly 5 years and took place at around 2:30 a.m. Korea time, a matter of hours after the leaders of South Korea, the United States, and Japan met to discuss North Korea's nuclear issues on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague. The 3 had promised for a more united front against threats posed by North Korea's nuclear program, and the launch is being seen as an apparent protest against growing calls in the international community for the state's denuclearization. The launch also falls on the 4th anniversary of the sinking of a South Korean warship that left 46 dead. While Seoul blames the attack on North Korea, Pyongyang denies the charge. The North has launched a series of shorter-range rocket launches over the past 2 months, which were seen as an act of defiance against the annual joint military drills between South Korea and the United States. Ji-hae, ARIRANG News.
And it wasn't only South Korea expressing concerns over North Korea's latest provocation. China and Japan also chimed in. Sources say the Chinese government, the North's only major ally, believes the launches were an act of defiance, considering that it came soon after the 3-way meeting between leaders of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan in The Hague. Japan agrees and says Pyongyang's actions were a direct challenge to the 3-way talks. Tokyo, along with Seoul and Washington, has condemned the missile test as a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The South Korea marked a somber anniversary on this Wednesday, mourning the deaths of 46 sailors who lost their lives in a North Korean torpedo attack 4 years ago. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin was at a memorial ceremony held in Daejeon.
4 years ago this Wednesday, the South Korean warship Cheonan was sunk in a torpedo attack blamed on North Korea. To remember the 46 South Korean sailors who lost their lives that day, a memorial ceremony was held at Daejeon National Cemetery on Wednesday morning. Thousands of people, including families of the victims and high-ranking government officials, were in attendance. President Park Geun-hye wasn't able to attend the event, as she's currently in Europe, but did send a special statement.
To achieve reunification, we need a strong military. If there are future provocations from the north, our military should retaliate strongly.
Prime Minister Chung Hong-won also emphasized the importance of national security in light of Pyongyang making continuous threats. He also called on the North to stop its provocative acts.
North Korea recently launched missiles on 7 different occasions, escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. North Korea must stop its provocations and cooperate with the international community.
The memorial ceremony is not just a time to remember those brave souls who so tragically lost their lives. It's also a solemn reminder that South Korea needs to maintain the utmost readiness against future provocations from the North. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News, Daejeon.
For the latest news that impacts Korea and the world, join Ji-hae for a lively half-hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups as part of the government's 3-year economic. To become one, Korea now has a new opposition coalition party dubbed the New Politics Alliance for Democracy. The launch could be an electoral game changer as we draw closer to local elections in June. Kwon So-hwa has this report.
It's an historic moment for the new political party. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy held its official inauguration ceremony Wednesday afternoon, with hopes of bringing about a new era of politics based on trust and hope.
After 60 years of being the Democratic Party, we have joined with lawmaker Ahn Cheol-soo and are now reborn as the New Politics Alliance for Democracy.
Over 250 delegates, including lawmakers, officials, war veterans, and thousands of citizens from all walks of life, attended the event in southern Seoul's Olympic Stadium. Attendees paid tribute to the 46 victims that died when the warship Cheonan was sunk 4 years ago and commemorated the 104th anniversary of the death of independence fighter An Jung-geun prior to the main event. The new coalition will be jointly headed by Democratic Party Representative Kim Han-gil and independent lawmaker Ahn Cheol-soo for 1 year until it elects a party chairman and leadership next year. They completed legal measures for dissolving their previous parties and will now register as a new one with the National Election Commission. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy will hold 130 seats at the National Assembly, with a vast majority of them being members of the former Democratic Party. The ruling Saenuri Party currently has 156 seats in the parliament. The alliance adopted its platforms at the ceremony, which include a focus on forming a just society and maintaining peace.
If our party and the Saenuri Party can find a smart way to go about it, strong security and better inter-Korean relations can coexist. We can also foster public welfare and promote democracy together. Progressive or conservative, that's not what's significant. The people's livelihoods are.
Now that the New Politics Alliance for Democracy has officially been launched, the party will focus on garnering more support from the general public ahead of the June 4th local elections. Kwon So-hwa, ARIRANG News.
The Korean economy grew 3% last year, accelerating from an earlier estimate of 2.8%, while its gross national income also rose 4% on year. But it's not all good news. Our Pang Ji-hae tells us why.
Korea's central bank said Wednesday that the nation's economy expanded 3% in 2013 from a year earlier. That is faster than the bank's earlier estimate of 2.8% and outpaces the 2.3% recorded in 2012. The Bank of Korea said robust exports and a steady rise in consumer spending drove the higher-than-estimate performance despite sluggish facilities investment.
The upward revision comes with a caveat, however, as the nation's central bank recently adopted new international standards on calculating gross domestic product. Under the new standards, the bank changed the base year to 2010 from 2005 and included contributions from new sectors like research and development to the nation's gross domestic product. Experts point out that the new growth rate does not necessarily mean the domestic economy is on track to a stronger economic recovery.
The domestic economy is showing mixed signals this year. Exports, which account for half of the nation's GDP, looked bad in the first 2 months of this year, but consumption and production were decent.
Korea's gross national income, a gauge of the people's purchasing power, also rose 4% in 2013 from the previous year. The per capita GNI stood at over $26,000 last year, up from around $24,000 in 2012. Meanwhile, the central bank said that the new standards could also impact the bank's new growth forecast that's set to be unveiled early next month, but added it's too early to talk about the degree of change. Ji-hae, ARIRANG News.
The number of childbirths in the nation dropped even more in January to an 8-year low. Statistics Korea said Wednesday that about 41,000 babies were born in January, down more than 6% from a year earlier. It marks the 13th straight month of decline. The agency attributes the downward trend to more young couples holding off on marriage and more newlyweds waiting to have children, largely because of soaring housing prices. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but there are no words to be said on the photos that were on display in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul Wednesday. A special exhibition was held to raise awareness of Japan's wartime atrocities that were carried out during the early 20th century throughout Asia. Ji Myung-gil reports.
No colors, no words, just black and white photos that show the horrific scenes from Japan's past invasions of Korea and China. Ruling Saenuri Party lawmaker Kim Il-dong hosted a photo event Wednesday as a protest against Japan's unapologetic attitude towards its past wrongdoings.
We decided to hold this photo exhibition to let the world know about the atrocities Japan committed during World War II. We must never forget the cruelty and pain that our ancestors had to endure due to the Japanese imperialists.
The images are startling. Japanese soldiers mass murdering innocent civilians during the Nanjing massacre in China, simply to learn how it feels to kill on the battlefields. Women who are raped, brutally tortured, and eventually killed with sword bayonets. Japanese scientists conducting surgical procedures without anesthesia on prisoners of war after infecting them with various diseases. The photos clearly show the atrocities that were committed by Japanese soldiers during World War II. This exhibition will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube in 10 different languages. On the other side of the street, 2 former Korean comfort women rallied along with their supporters to demand that the Japanese government apologize for victimizing them and tens of thousands of others.
It's really agonizing. We've been holding this rally every Wednesday for 20 years, and still the Japanese government hasn't made an apology or provided compensation. They think everything will be solved if they keep quiet.
Historians say up to 200,000 women, mostly from Korea but also from China, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Taiwan, were forced to serve as sex slaves in the Japanese army brothels during the Second World War. Despite mounting evidence, a minority of right-wing Japanese citizens insist the state and military were not responsible and claim the women were common prostitutes. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
Let's check on some of the stories making headlines on the global front, from the crisis in Ukraine to the outrage and grief over the missing Malaysia airliner. We go live to Paul Lee at the news center. Paul, we've seen over the past week deteriorating relations between the West and Russia over the annexation of Crimea. What's the latest?
Well, Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk says his country would be prepared to fight if Russian forces were to cross the border into southeastern Ukraine. Speaking in an interview with PBS NewsHour, Yatsenyuk said it was the duty of every Ukrainian citizen to protect their country.
First of all, on Crimea. What we did in Crimea, we refrained from use of force in order to prevent the bloodshed and in order to show to the entire world that it's Russian military and Russian regime who occupied the Ukrainian territory and who has made a real aggression.
Western officials say they're now focused on moving forward with economic sanctions against Moscow rather than trying to persuade Russian President Vladimir Putin to give back Crimea.
And we hear families are reacting with anger, even violence in Malaysia over the missing plane. How are they coping with the news of the tragic fate of the airliner?
It's been an eruption of grief and anger. Some have taken the news as a sign of closure, while many of the families of the some 150 Chinese passengers on board Flight 370 are refusing to accept that their loved ones have now died, citing the lack of absence of any wreckage found. A protest was held Tuesday outside the Malaysian embassy in Beijing, demanding that Malaysian authorities release more information. And a U.S. law firm says it has started a multi-million-dollar legal proceedings against Malaysia Airlines and Boeing in what could be a very expensive legal battle over the lost plane. Ribik Law Chartered International said in a statement that it believed both defendants were responsible for the disaster. The search for the missing airliner resumed Wednesday after a day of bad weather. Authorities say Chinese ships and an Australian naval vessel have reached the suspected crash area with up to 9 aircraft on their way. No pieces of the plane have yet been found.
And turning to the United States, where rescue crews are still searching for victims of a massive mudslide in the state of Washington. Paul, give us a detail on that situation.
Sure thing. Rescue workers were able to recover 2 more bodies on Tuesday, with signs of 8 more killed in the landslide that devastated a small town near Oso, Washington. That brings the likely death toll to 24, with as many as 176 people still unaccounted for in the 3 days since search and rescue efforts were launched. Officials said the chances were low of finding additional survivors amid the flowing mud and debris.
A very challenging day today with the rain, and that just further complicated things. We continued our search and recovery operation on the entire slide area. Unfortunately, we didn't find any signs of life. We didn't locate anybody alive.
8 more people are receiving treatment for injuries, including a 22-week-old baby who is in critical condition at a hospital in Seattle. Authorities say the disaster now ranks as one of the deadliest landslides in recent U.S. history.
And before we let you go, Paul, tell us about the 104th anniversary of the death of a Korean patriot in China. How did it go?
Well, a delegation of Korean lawmakers held a ceremony Wednesday at a memorial hall dedicated to the memory of An Jung-gun in the Chinese city of Dalian. Some 200 people attended the event, which was jointly hosted by the Korea-China Friendship Association. The Communist Party head of Dalian, Tang Jun, said his city would actively remember the Korean independence fighter. An was executed in a Japanese prison on March 26, 1910, after assassinating Hidobumi Ito, Korea's first Japanese governor general, in the Chinese city of Harbin in October the previous year. Ji-hae?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in about 2 hours' time. Let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for a check on the weather. Now, Bo-kyung, it felt more like early summer here in the capital today. How's tomorrow looking?
Well, Ji-hae, just about the same. Today, afternoon highs rose to the low 20s in the central region, so for some, it could have felt a bit hot walking around outdoors. Taking a look at the current conditions, the nation will gradually be under the influence of a high-pressure system, which is why we've begun to see clear skies down south. However, some parts of the southern regions are still seeing seeing rain at this hour, but that will clear up by later tonight. As for tomorrow, it looks to be another fantastic spring day, so make sure to get outside for a walk. Other than that, for those of you making plans for the weekend, keep in mind that another round of spring rain is forecast on Saturday, and the higher than the seasonal average temperatures will continue through next week. With that in mind, let's see what tomorrow has in store. Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju all make it to the mid-20s, while Busan reaches 19. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju hit 22 and 18 degrees, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 11 and 15. That's all the updates for this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Ji-hae in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.